Do all Chinese people know Kung Fu? Are they all really good at math? Play the piano? And most importantly, do Chinese people eat dogs? Hey guys, and welcome to AB Chinese. In this series of videos, I'm going to go over some of the most prevalent Chinese stereotypes and either debunk them or explain where they may have come from. Of course, for a video topic like this, I have to include a disclaimer that these are my opinions as a Chinese American and do not necessarily reflect all Chinese people in general. You can pause the video now if you would like to read the full disclaimer. I will say though that for this video I've done a fair amount of research to back up what I say, so I'll link all of my sources in the description down below if you guys want to check that out. My hope is that after watching this video you'll have a better understanding of Chinese people, their culture, and their values. So let's get started. 我们开始吧. Stereotype number 1. Chinese students are really good at math. So the wider stereotype is that Chinese students are not just good at math, but basically at academics in general, and especially STEM fields. I mean, there have been a lot of jokes made on the internet about how Chinese students can't come home with a grade less than an A, which is the highest mark, to the point where a B plus or even an A minus is basically a failure. Like, check out this image I found on the internet of an Asian grading scale. So is this stereotype true? Well, if you look at the International Mathematical Olympiad competition, you'll see that China has absolutely dominated. This chart is a bit outdated, but the trend still continues to this day. And hey, check out the winning US team from 2019. Oh yeah. Another compelling piece of evidence is the average IQ by country. If you take a look at this list from Forbes, you'll notice that the top 4 regions are basically all ethnic Chinese. However, do keep in mind that IQ is not an absolute measure of intelligence, and modern psychology recognizes 8 different types of intelligence according to Gardner's theory. I'm not an expert on psychology or intelligence, but what I can tell you is that Chinese people have traditionally valued education. From the pre-modern era, where theoretically anybody could take the imperial examination and if you do well enough, you could become a government official, to the modern era, where education is seen as the primary way for a young person to better themselves and to contribute to society. Social class is also more important for Chinese people than it is for Americans. And the higher your education and the more educated you are, the higher your social class. And as such, the pressure for kids to do well in school is intense and it starts early. Definitely more so than in America, where the kids' happiness and personal desires are usually prioritized over education. And this mentality is mostly true for Chinese immigrants as well. Most of the Chinese immigrants from like the past 50 years, or like my parents' generation, came from a very poor China. And to them, studying hard and earning a good education is the only way for their children to build up a better life and to improve their living standards. So a lot of Chinese Americans who grew up here also experienced a lot of academic pressure. And this is important. I don't want anyone to think that all Chinese students are naturally gifted. That is not true. Most Chinese students, whether abroad or in the mainland, have shed blood, sweat, and tears to get to where they are. And I mean that literally. Stereotype number 2. Chinese people are unhygienic. So this is an outdated misconception that not just Americans have, but other countries, even in Asia, have as well, it seems. For example, Wang Feifei from the Korean girl group Miss A recalls that in her early days in Korea, some people thought that she only showered once a week because she's Chinese. Chinese people care about hygiene as much as any other group of people would, Sometimes even more so if you consider that Asian guys in general tend to be more open to self-care and beauty than Western guys are, for example. So I call this an outdated misconception because remember how I said that China was a very poor country 50 years ago? Well, when conditions are bad, you generally don't have energy to put much thought into personal hygiene. That's just a general statement and it's not a reflection of culture. Stereotype number 3. Chinese people eat dogs. So when I first heard this as a kid, I thought it was the weirdest thing because I didn't eat dogs and I didn't know anybody else who did. But I think there's 2 reasons why this stereotype is so prevalent. The first reason is that, in general, Chinese people do eat more parts of an animal than Western countries do. Things like chicken feet, or beef tendons, or fish eye are all considered delicacies in Chinese cuisine. No part of the animal is wasted. There's even a well-known quote by Prince Philip that goes, "If it has 4 legs and is not a chair, the Cantonese will eat it." And even Chinese people stereotype Guangdong as a region where anything alive is possibly food. So not to pick on the Cantonese, but yeah, Chinese cuisine can be more varied than Western cuisine. The second reason is that dogs are such a popular pet in the US and other Western countries that the mere prospect of anybody eating a dog stirs strong emotions in people. And these days in China, most people will definitely consider dogs as pets only and not food. There's a lot of popular pet channels that you can find on social media. For example, this one on Douyin.
哎呦，你怎么开的车？都撞到我了！
我车都没动，你俩碰瓷儿呢？
别废话，2天。
这也太贵了。
嫌贵，你可以讲价呀。
However, if I'm honest, it did happen in the past when dogs were considered more farm animals and not necessarily household pets. Even to this day, there are still some small regions in China where you can find dog meat, and the locals there do enjoy eating it and not necessarily out of need. However, that's such a small percentage of the population compared to how big China is that to say Chinese people eat dogs is pretty unfair. That's like saying Americans eat alligators because some town in Louisiana and Texas like to eat it. Stereotype number 4. All Chinese people know Kung Fu. This is probably the least true of anything I'm going to talk about today. I have met more Americans who know karate than Chinese people who know Kung Fu. But I get the stereotype, like I know where it comes from. It's because Bruce Lee, who was ethnically Chinese, popularized Kung Fu and martial arts in the US and in the West. He brought it to the silver screen, he brought it to the film industry. And that first impression left a lasting impression. Also, fun fact about Bruce Lee. Before Bruce Lee, Chinese Kung Fu masters actually refused to teach Kung Fu to Westerners. They refused to teach to anybody who wasn't ethnically Chinese, and Bruce Lee changed that. So if you want to read more about Bruce Lee, you can check out this article, which will be in the description as well. Stereotype number 5. Chinese kids play either piano or violin. This is kind of true, not gonna lie. I play piano, and I think I can explain why these are the instruments of choice for Chinese people. So Chinese people value social class and prestige, right? And they're very blunt about it. That's why Chinese parents will encourage their kids to become doctors, lawyers, and dentists, the stereotypical jobs. It's not so much for the money as it is for the social class that comes with it. And music is not traditionally very classy, but classical music is, because it was historically enjoyed by and studied by wealthy people in Europe. And the piano is a very important instrument in classical music because it can serve as a solo instrument, it can serve as accompaniment, or literally double anything else in an orchestra. And having a piano in your home and somebody who can play it is also kind of like symbolic of a well-to-do family and a well-educated family. The violin is also a very important instrument in classical music because for a long time, classical music was dominated by string instruments, and the violin is the highest pitched stringed instrument. So the human ear naturally hears the highest pitch when there's a lot of instruments, which is why the violin will tend to get most of the melody lines and not, say, the cello, which is a lower pitched instrument. Not to mention, the first chair violin or the best player is also concertmaster of the orchestra. So that's why these instruments are the desirable instruments for Chinese people to play, and why you don't see very many Chinese saxophone players or Chinese drummers, for example, because those instruments were not traditionally associated with high class. However, this is something that is changing as young people are increasingly more interested in other styles of music. I do also want to point out that most Chinese parents who have their kids study music usually don't see it as a career path per se, but as a way for their kids to become more educated and cultured. Alright, that is it for today. I hope you learned something new. If you're thinking, I've heard of another stereotype and he didn't cover it, don't worry, there is a part 2 coming, so make sure you're subscribed to stay notified for that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. 我们下次再见了，拜拜。